each other in unique ways. And so I was like, what if that and learning were a thing? And so I was like typing stuff and I was like, there are humans. And so now I'm just watching everything you guys do now. I'm just like studying and learning and growing. So
Yeah, it's magic. Especially for certain students. They just really come alive. I mean, that's what I saw with my students post-pandemic was I couldn't get them to interact. I couldn't get them excited. They weren't talking to each other. And I was just like, how do we, this is a good time for tabletop RPGs. And,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, great. Well, I'm glad you're here. Yeah, it's becoming we didn't invent this. People have been doing it for a long time, but it feels like there's a movement. We're trying to kind of bring it together, like create a space for educators here. And there's some other groups which are focused on other applications. There's a lot of groups focused on designers. There's folks focused on psychiatry or like counseling. It's becoming really popular there. But I didn't see any group really focused on educators. So that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, that's definitely what got me interested. I've been doing games in my with my special ed kids for years. And I've noticed how much they've improved by using the role playing game stuff like that. Then I found about I think it was about 4 years ago now. I found out about Game to Grow,
Yes.
and I got the critical support system. And I've been using that, and it just I've seen the change in the kids just with their social emotional behaviors as well as their academics. So I've worked the academic into it as well. So yeah, so I'm always looking for more ways to improve.
Wonderful. No, and you guys, on the front line with stories from the field, that's the really good stuff. That's the really rich stuff. So we want to, you guys are what experience you can share. If you want to host a session or write an article or, if you think you got a lesson you want to share, we'd love to put it in the book. Um, just an open invite. But let me jump in and get to the big idea for tonight. And you guys both attended the last one. So maybe I'll skip some of this extra stuff about, who we are, and we've talked a little bit about it. I like to lead just a gloss over the integrated framework on my screen here. And this is like our one pager. This is something I developed out of a seminar a couple years ago, and it was looking at, again, kind of a vacuum in the space of like a view of what tabletop RPGs can offer in terms of learning, different types of learning opportunities that tabletop RPGs do particularly well. There's a lot of different islands of conversation about things like socio-emotional skills. So there's a lot of people talking just about socio-emotional skills. There's a lot of folks talking about what it does for identity, how it lets us try on different types of identity, how that's really powerful. Or there's things about creativity and collaboration. But I wanted to kind of create a view of look at all the stuff that happens when we play tabletop RPGs. So that's this wheel model where there's like six spokes. And there's two that I don't think are talked about enough that I'll just highlight. One is academic literacy. So just the reading, writing, speaking, and listening, the information literacy that's needed to play a lot of these systems is really complex. And what's interesting is when players and learners are really motivated to play the game, and we know there's a ton of kids more and more every day who just want to play. And there's also the shortfall of groups to play in. So that's something we want to work on too, help them connect with each other to create peer groups. But when they actually play, it's just a ton of academic like reading and writing skill practice. And that's just not really discussed enough. And I think we need to wind up some more research that really tracks young people who are playing this game intensely and look at what their literacy scores are. And there's some interesting analogs of video games learning, but I won't go there right now. The other one that I'll talk about for a minute, and I want to do a later workshop on is about attention restoration and sort of tabletop RPGs as an antidote to excessive screen time. And that works a number of ways. One, they're not going to be on the screen, ideally, if they're doing this. They're using pen and paper and they're sitting face to face. So that's really powerful in and of itself. But there's actually something more going on with it just than not being on the screen. It also kind of taps into this idea from an old theory from the that was proposed in the 80s called attention restoration theory, or ART. And it looks at particularly how nature can be restored if time in green spaces like walking in the park or in the woods can be really restorative for excessive TV time is what they were looking at the time. But now it's, we're looking at it in more like screen time and devices and so forth. And I've argued, and I want to develop this more, that playing tabletop RPGs might do the same thing. It creates this fictional world that's really immersive. It creates this feeling of being away, which is one of the components of attention restoration theory. It creates this feeling of fascination with what they call soft fascination. We're really engrossed in an idea in a non-threatening space, which is a really good headspace to be in. Unlike a lot of screen time, especially social media, we get really wired in, and they've done some MRI and some other really high level research, some neurological research on people when they're on screen time, and it literally activates like fight or flight responses. Pupils are dilated. We're sensing for opportunities. We're like looking at all these ads. We're looking at all these colors. Uh, it's very engrossing and activating. And it's not a very good space to be in all the time. And the opposite thing happens when we're in green spaces in nature. Our heart rate goes down, our blood pressure goes down. We're able to really focus, and actually we reflect on our own identity, and we start to think about who we are, and another thing we do is we anticipate future stressors. So it's really restorative. It puts us in a very different space to be in nature. And there, those two spaces of green time versus screen time, now we've got this huge imbalance with our society, and especially our young people, our teenagers. And so I'm suggesting tabletop RPGs, they're not quite nature, but they're doing something else, and I think similar. And I'd like to elevate that research. And I want to elevate that conversation. So that's one of my agenda items, and it's not something I see anybody else talking about. So that'll be a future workshop. I don't know if that jives with anybody. But yeah, and where we're at with the mission. So this framework is our one pager, and then what I want to talk about a little more extensively is a different framework we've developed called transformational play, and it also builds on prior research from video games and learning. So that's the main topic. But where we're at with the project is we've developed this Discord channel, which is a space for educators to play. Our real hope is not just a place to connect and share experience and resources, but ultimately a place to get people together and play. And we're doing that tonight, hopefully at 8:30. So share the good word. We're doing our crowdfunded book, and we've got 770 followers. So we're launching here in about 10 days. Really exciting. Spread the good word there. And after that, we want to start working on more products like that, but also our community programming through a program we called, or the working title is Big Dragons, Little Dragons. And so that'll be connecting kind of like big brothers, big sisters, in where we find people in the community who want to play D&D, and we connect them with peers and mentors, kind of like maybe middle schoolers and high schoolers, or high schoolers and college students. And we might be able to offer those folks, a stipend to set up, and like maybe a college student who's a pre-licensed educator. And maybe, we go in and we do some training with these folks to say, how could you be a educational DM, or just a DM who kind of, uses a couple tricks to make it a little more educational, to be that kind of peer mentor. We give them a little stipend, and then they run their group with those kids. And it's just recreational D&D space, just a safe space to play once a week and connect. And they're going to have the books, and they're going to have papers. That's going to be one of the stipulations, is it's pen and paper. But creating those little peer groups, I think, is going to be really powerful. So we might do some fundraising for that afterwards. We want to continue doing research, and then finally, we're seeking grants. We want to get money. We want to go after National Science Foundation and National Education Association money for educational programming. So we're kind of in it to win it. We're serious about starting this, I don't want a revolution, or this movement in teaching and learning. So I'm very excited. We've already won a grant from Google. And so we've got a Google Ads grant where we get around $10,000 in ad credit a month. So that's very cool as a nonprofit organization. So that's helping drive traffic. But that's like my, 5-minute intro on kind of where we are. And then we're going to get into transformational play, But let's do open mic for a second. Does anybody, have something they want to share? Anything they want to say? I just want to give it back to you guys. Any comments or stories? And I did have to put Kirby in there from the Super Nintendo. Was it Kirby All-Star? It was a game I used to love as a kid. That was the mic.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I find such great value in this is because the kind of teacher that I am, I work with a little parochial school, and I'm their youth and young adult pastor, but teaching Bible is cool, but it comes with a lot of, I don't know, like it comes with a lot of baggage. It comes with a lot of, and so what if it was possible to explore that, And so I'm kind of playing with this idea right now, like there's the studies, the 28 of them, and you give them, and you sit and you stare like deer and just dump information, and it's just so non-romantic. I'm just like and so I started building this thing, and I'm going through, but it's kind of like a time travel thing where, like whatever your paradigm is and what you believe, like, that there's a fall once upon a time, and angelic, and you time travel there, and you're just kind of like in a disguise. You're kind of like an anthropologist, but
Yeah.
not anthro. It's not anthro, or it's something else. And so we're using these things, and they have to kind of find the clues, listen in, reference things in the book, because they have this book, and try to be creative with it. And so that's kind of the intro to it. I've got like a piece of it done, and I'm kind of shy about it because it's kind of silly but creative. And
Oh,
so I'm just
yeah.
trying to work at it, So it's just listening to what you guys have been doing, and it's really opened my mind to so many possibilities. So
Wow, what a project. That is
yeah.
very interesting. I can't I yeah, I ran into somebody at a conference a couple months ago who was working in a church, yeah, at a church at like a Sunday school doing something kind of related with Bible stories. And man, it'd be good to connect you guys. I didn't. I'll have to see if I have that connection. I have tons of memories. I went to, we used to read the Bible all the time growing up. We did the devotionals and the stories, and I went to Sunday school, and so many of those stories have stuck with me. And a lot of it were the illustration, they were great stories and the illustrations and the production design in those books. So, um, I can't think of a more interesting way to get kids interested in besides giving them agency in these stories, right? What would you do? I mean, right? What would you do? And
Exactly.
it's really cool to try out different models, like to have a mechanism in there where they can reset it, right? Like, oops, we made it, like that didn't work out. Now we need to go and try again. Like that's one of the things one of the NPCs and one of the mechanisms we suggest in our book is to have some sort of Deus Ex Machina where you can let that happen through the plot. And so it might be like an oracle, or it might be like a supercomputer, or it might be, a wizard or something, or like an artifact, like a crystal ball. But it gives the players this tool, and it gives the GM this tool to let them try and, tinker with things without a risk of, breaking the whole world, right? So that's one thing we need to consider when trying out these sort of problem scenarios. But yeah, what a project. Keep us in the loop on that. I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah, and I like what you said, because in a way that's kind of what happens. There's just this thing where you have this eyes, and as you're going through and tinkering with things, because usually we're trying to feed a certain lesson in a way, but giving that creativity that, okay, well, I turned it a little too hard and looks like the handle broke off, like you just kind of move forward, and then you might reset and you're standing by that sea of glass again, staring at your reflection, and it's just kind of like So I like the stuff you just said. It's
What
very much resonates.
Yeah, like a Groundhog Day kind of scenario, right? Where it's a week up in a chest day. When it's touchy subjects too, because when you get
Yeah.
kids, and this happens in any kind of D&D, a lot of kids get unleashed and they're ready to go wild on the world. They're ready to go kick in doors and break the plot and put it in directions that you would have never anticipated. So when you're dealing with topics and subjects that are a little more, sacred, or, it's just, it sets that up where it's tough to manage. And that's one of the things we get into a little in transformational play. And I have some examples of that, of how to set up character creation and world building in tandem with your players so that they're invested in the world, and that so their identity in the world is one that they care about a little more than often what it is when we play normal D&D, when we're just like, you're Conan, like make a barbarian and you're here to like take names and win. Instead, I'll get into this in the slides a little more. One of the tricks is like, you spend a lot more time before the game in helping them create their identity and their character, and you help them become a part of that world in a way that they care about it more. And you put them in situations where they're much less likely to become what we call murder hobos, right? And that's the hope. And that's I haven't seen it go. I haven't done a ton of work with middle schoolers lately, but I did do a project 2 years ago, which I'm going to talk about. And I ran these rules, and I didn't have any issue with people, going off the rails. They were happy to play too. So they're very respectful in that regard. And you might have that same dynamic where they're like, I'm just so happy to be playing this, that they'll be more respectful. So maybe that's not something you would worry about, especially when you have that relationship with your students, where they know you're the youth pastor and so forth. But
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, because of that age, nothing is sometimes sacred. Like they ask the questions. Like sometimes the adults, we like to pretend like things aren't happening, and but this generation, they will open up a can, and
yeah,
it will, and you're just standing there and you're like, okay, all right. Well, and you have to walk with them carefully through it. But that's the reason why I think this approach is so magnificent. It just allows for that, to kind of challenge some of the, I don't know, the status quo. And now you're in a world that can support that, and or go like you said, to go murder hobo, weird.
yeah, and one way to think, a safer way to do it maybe is to take some of the themes from some of these stories and put them in a little bit of a less, familiar scenario, right? Like instead of actually running, some of the actual, Bible stories, maybe we take some of the themes or ideas and we put characters in a world that's, not exactly that world, right? We're not running Bronze Age, ancient Egypt. We're not doing Old Testament stuff, but we're talking about a lot of those ideas maybe in a somewhat different context. And you could have that role play scenario in tandem with a reading, with the chapter, or with the lesson. That's what we've
Yeah.
done and I've seen some lesson plans done with like classic texts or literature, where they'll read, some Oedipus Rex, but then there's a role play component where they get to explore ancient Thebes, right? So now you're in ancient Thebes, you're running around, you're checking out the Sphinx, or you're exploring, the ruins that's related to ancient Greece. And that's part of a unit that supplements, a study of one of those texts. So it's just another thought.
It's cool.
Anybody else want to jump in?
One thing I would like to find out is just how to get more people that you work with enthused about it. Like, I'm at a score, my admin is totally against it.
Oh,
I've been accused of not being scientifically based using it, even though I give them like 30 articles on how it is. But they still see the old D&D satanic panic kind of thing.
oh
And
yeah.
luckily, I'm at my this year where I'm tenured, so they really can't do much about it this year anymore. But so I just like to find more ways to, I guess, get people on the same page, like co-workers and stuff like that.
I mean, that's a tough one. I think it is hard to change hearts and minds if they've already been, kind of dead set against it. I think the proof is in the pudding, though. Like, if you can come out with some data to show, hey, these kids, look at the growth, look at the test scores, right? Look at how these kids are doing. You just can't argue with that, right? And you could do however you're tracking this stuff. I think to come in there and get rigorous with it. I think that's the ultimate, kind of argument. Um, and I think certainly, parading around the studies and maybe the book we're publishing, or we want, like, there's others that are doing this and we're talking about offering professional development courses. I see this as a professional development, like, this is a moment where we're talking about teaching and learning and role. So like, all that kind of stuff that's beginning to percolate, I think, hopefully lends legitimacy to it. It's one of the reasons we were building the brand the way we are. Like, it's kind of, tabletop edu. It's not like a lot of other brands in tabletop RPGs, which are, more flavorful or spicy, but we want to do something that we could put in front of administrators or parents that looked, a little more corporate or a little more established or have a little more authority from that perspective. Something where we could go in front of the NSF or the NEA and get maybe win some grants. And so that I definitely recognize that as a challenge. I don't have any easy answers though. There's an article I might send you from, are you familiar with Cade Wells and his work? And he's been doing it forever too. And he ended up really tracking his students like reading scores. And he published some data, which was really powerful. And I think that really he got some press on it. So I think that might be the thing to do. Oh, you're muted, sir.
Sorry, I keep forgetting which mic I'm on. You said that author was Kate Wells?
Yeah. We linked him in the resource feed there. But he had an article published specifically about that in Edutopia. I don't think we linked that one yet, but that's pretty easy to find, I think. He got a lot of press. Yeah, he did like a comparison, I think, and he really saw his students who were playing in the D&D group really get great reading score improvement. Um, and so that was very cool. And that was a good environment because they had such strict testing and stuff. So it was in some spaces it's just hard to do it, right? Like some spaces we're not doing testing, we're not collecting data like that. And so he had a natural experiment that I think was easy to use. So in other spaces you might have to build your own kind of stuff. Um, well, unless somebody else has any questions, I might dive in here can you guys still see my slides? I might dive into transformational play. So, and we can leave a little room at the end too. I don't want to belabor this too much, but this is really inspired by a lot of my work from my master's degree, which was in instructional design. And at the time, I was really interested in video games and learning. And so, this is Sasha Barab, who's done some really incredible work. He studied under James Paul G, who's like a legendary literacy researcher who wrote a book called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy, which is a great read. Um, and now I think Barab, he was at Arizona State. I think maybe he's at Indiana now. But this was maybe 10 years ago. He wrote this paper called Transformational Play, and he did some really rigorous research with it within the context of a video game. And it was inspired by work from Dewey, the Dewey Decibel System, old school theorist about learning and all kinds of a philosopher, a great American from the early 20th century, which really looked at how learning happens. And he discussed this transaction and this relationship between the knower and the known. And so that when we go to seek out learning something, we are transformed by that, and then we also are able to transform it. And he was really interested in the idea of democracy, right? To be a good citizen, to have an active democracy, it's participatory. So citizens have to be active. And he really thought of schools, and he was a kind of a revolutionary or somewhat of a radical when he talked about schools, because he thought schools were going about things all the wrong way. He said we need to have our students out there in the community as citizens acting and doing, right? We need to have people not isolated, with their noses in books all the time, but they need to be a part of the democracy. So he was really critical of the schooling system and how it kind of isolate and remove kids from society. And he thought we had to have this sort of much more active role. So that's where transformational comes from. It's the idea that when we learn, we're transformed by it, and then also we can transform the world through learning. And so it's built out a little more, and I'll go to the next a couple slides later. And so there's this great theory in pedagogy called the community of inquiry, which is often referred to in like Pedagogy 101. And it has these great Venn diagrams, and it talks about social presence, cognitive presence, teaching presence. And it really puts at the center of education the idea of inquiry or learning. It's not about the teacher. It's not just about the students. It's not just about society. It's not just about cognition. It's not just about social relations. It's not just about cognition. It's all this sort of richness, and we need to kind of manage all this chaos. And out of that emerges a relationship with truth and knowledge, and we kind of co-create together. Well, to back up, Barab kind of is continuing in that tradition of challenging how teaching and learning is going on. And he says, well, there's a lot of students so disengaged. We're really failing a lot of students. The way we're going about things isn't that great. And they were looking at video games and how video games are such an engaging media. Why is it that they work so well? And why is it they actually work so well for teaching and learning? And so a lot of this came out of that. And so one of his key insights was that students learn more effectively when they're actively involved in problem solving as a meaningful narrative, which tabletop RPGs I think do really well. So I'm making this leap from video games to tabletop RPGs. And there's three components, and we'll get into this a little more of it. And he uses this peace diagram as sort of the visualization, and the best version quality of this graphic I can find is still this old thing, which looks like it came from the 90s. But as these three kind of spokes in his wheel: person with intentionality, and I expand this in our book to be player or PC with intentionality. And then we have content with legitimacy, and then context with consequentiality. And so the idea is really, and this goes back to our discussion earlier about, do our players have a rooting in the world we're creating, and do they have agency, I think is the word, right? Are they there kind of with a mission? Are they able to affect things? So the player's identity is really central, that they're quote unquote agents that can change the story. And often you want to have that identity rooted closely with these other two components. So the game he built, really custom built for this research, was his students he gave them an identity. He gave them this role of being kind of intern researcher, intern field biologists. And they were at this park, an underfunded public park. It was a video game, it was a simulation. And this park ranger comes up and says, look, all the fish are dying. I need your help. And everyone's mad in the community. And so you had to go around like collecting clues from the townspeople, from the loggers up the river, and then go and collect samples around the different parts of the ecosystem to gather all this knowledge and work with different people. So he set out this identity that was very specific, but that had a kind of power within the context. And so unlike maybe, like a wizard from another plane who's there to destroy things, some rogue agent who you run into sometimes in a tabletop RPG. The idea here, if we're working in an applied environment, is give your players some more constraints, right? Have them already established in the world in some capacity where they're kind of on track to be working together towards your learning content goals, right? So we still want to give them some agency, and the agency needs to be but the agency needs to be aligned with what we want them to be working on. So this is different from recreational D&D, and that's one of the first big insights. Content with legitimacy is this idea that we want to be working on authentic problems, drawing from real world challenges. And Dewey would have loved this, right? As in a democracy, we want to be working on real problems that matter to people, everyday people, right? Our kitchen table, community based challenges and problems. And so what's important, not just to the content from our what we need to be teaching in a given context, but also what kind of matters to students. And so how might we frame that in a way that might be a little more meaningful to students? And tabletop RPGs, I think, are a great way to set up, a somewhat fictional world where we can frame, a problem from a book, but in a really interesting way. And I'm going to have a couple examples in a minute. And the third component is context with consequentiality. And this really means when the players take action, then the world responds to that. The world responds to the player's actions. The context of the story evolves based on their decisions, making learning meaningful and personal. And we know as D&D players, this is the best kind of D&D, right? When the DM is responding to my character and my actions, that's when you feel seen. That's when you feel powerful. That's the idea of agency, right? And that is a big challenge I'll admit, with running this in teaching and learning context, because oftentimes we have so many students and they've got so much stuff going on. So, that's a challenge. And I think there's some shortcuts, but there's no real, silver bullets there. But these are the three sort of components of how to set up transformational play. That is play that's really deep, that's engrossing, and that actually has the opportunity to change kids' lives, or really, maybe not just change kids' lives, but really affect kind of powerful retention of ideas and make them feel like they're a part of something. We already talked about community of inquiry. And one of the examples, the slide is about how transformational play works in tabletop RPGs. How might tabletop RPGs apply transformational play? So inhabiting roles, we want to make sure our players or our learners have agency, right? You want to be totally open, make whatever you want. Within some context, that's fine, right? Let them go crazy with the backstory. Let them go crazy with their personality. But maybe, like for the example in Candlekeep, right? So Candlekeep, I ran this game with my college students. I love Candlekeep because they're working within a library, and every module in Candlekeep, if you're familiar with it, is about a mystery associated with a book. And so the course was about research skills, information literacy. And so I added some further constraints, which Candlekeep doesn't. I said, your character has to be somewhat of a bookish character. They have to have a certain level of knowledge, skills, an interest in history, or an interest in magic, or some sort of expert in some area of study. So I didn't tell them exactly what they had to be an expert in, but, they could be a druid who's really good at botany. They could be a barbarian who's really good at like nature stuff, or weather tracking. They could be obviously a wizard who's interested in arcana, particular types of arcana. And so I gave them this little constraint that gave me a lot of affordances to help them value learning and value research. On top of that, I gave them a little cue of they all have to start with some book that they bring as entry to Candlekeep. So they had to think about some fun artifact that they could design with me, that they could talk about. It was part of their character's backstory. So this sort of sets the stage to give them meaning and agency in the world. And so they're somewhat connected to the world. They're not interested in just smashing the world up, right? Or slaying everything or looting everything, right? Another cue there I often give players is I want you to come up with an NPC or two with me. I'm going to work with you I'm going to give you more information about the world. We're going to spend a week or two setting up this game. I want you to write with me a couple, tell me about where your hometown is. Tell me about who are your mentors, who's your character's mentors, who's your character's heroes, what are their dreams. And then I'm going to work with you to put those characters in my world. And then they're a little more invested in the world, right? They're a little more involved. So we're helping them construct an identity, an alternate ego here that's really rooted, and so that they care about it and so that they're motivated to play it. This is something that a lot, great DMs, I think, do this or do some version of this sometimes. There's many ways to be a great DM, but I think this stuff is pretty powerful in applied settings. So, and then solving authentic problems, right? So, there's just not a lot of room in applied D&D, especially if you're working within like a class period, for a lot of like combat, right? Like stuff that's really outside of what we're trying to rehearse. I think it's awesome for recreational D&D if you're hosting a club or something like that. Let them just play the full game. Let them just play and let them spend 4 hours, 8 hours on a Saturday doing the whole thing. And then making decisions with consequences. So this just takes work. It takes time to say, set up those threshold moments where what are these choices that matter, and you're gonna have to build in those mechanisms of letting them reset or adjust if they don't go well. So, yeah, I think tabletop RPGs naturally lend themselves to transformational play because the gameplay centers around these core elements as it stands. A lot of video games don't. A lot of video games don't have many of these components, but in tabletop RPGs, we have this history and these sort of ways in which we've learned to play it that aren't necessarily conducive to really applied learning. So, I think we need to make some adjustments to make it really work. Um, Yeah, I think I've hit a lot of these points. GMs need to design content that explores meaningful content that matters not only to learning, but the students' interest. Um, yeah. So, and I posted this idea about the ADDIE model for instructional design, and this is my training as an instructional designer is looking at, how would we go about doing this? If you want to do this for your particular setting, you could try and apply this framework and kind of work it from tip to tail, from analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's just one approach. If you're looking for like, step by step, which some people do, might be one way to think about, backwards design. This is my other example I'll discuss briefly before we open it back up. This is a STEM TTRPG I ran for some middle schoolers last spring. This is a charter school up the way. It's a science academy. It's like a STEM charter school, public school. I was really impressed with it. I'm hoping to send my son there in a couple years when he's that age. Students are amazing, and I actually teamed up with a former student of mine who's now a teacher there, and so that was really fun. And so I ran a 6-week course with his sixth and seventh graders, and the idea was um, so there was a STEM or a sci-fi world. I ran two groups, so I was trying to do a control study. So there was a group that was just D&D, just kind of Forgotten Realms, fantasy D&D. Everybody got to play whatever. And then there was a group that was the sci-fi STEM world. And instead of playing in the sci-fi STEM world, instead of playing wizards, clerics, barbarians, they got to choose. Their classes were like engineer or computer scientist or botanist or technologist. So they all chose real STEM careers as their class. And so, uh, and then I gave them sort of problems that were based in STEM, right? So they had to go and repair this downed weather tower, and they had to endure intense weather. Another one was this was it. There was a train crash. Maybe you guys heard about this 2 years ago in East Palestine, Ohio, and there was this huge toxic spill. And we're in Northeast Ohio. This was literally like 50 minutes from us. That railroad is 10 minutes from my house, the same railroad. And so it was really visceral to the community, the idea of these train crashes and these toxic spills. So we had a train crash in the sci-fi world, right? And the fish were dying and there was a spill and they had to go investigate. I didn't want to make it too freaky and too real, but at the same time, I wanted to have some content that was meaningful and legitimate to the students. And so I wanted to, to engage with it. And they did. They got it. They were excited to clean stuff up and they were very satisfied, very happy to, stick it to the owners of the train and shut down, how it was running. So that was an example of sort of modifying some of the challenges to better suit kind of the context and the content. The research was I wanted to see if having students role play different identities, STEM identities, would change their real world intentions about going into STEM. So we gave them a pre and post survey, like, hey, before this 6-week D&D thing once a week, how likely are you to go into STEM? Into whatever. I gave them like a 10-minute survey. And then I wanted to see afterwards, after role playing STEM jobs, were they more likely to go into STEM? And we didn't see a ton of movement with the survey, unfortunately. I was excited. I was a little disappointed, but I want to do it again and spend more time with the students because we were only there for 30 minutes once a week for 6 weeks. So it was very little actual time. But that was rooted in some interesting theory about how going into STEM requires a lot of times people who go into STEM, their parents were in STEM or they have role models very close to them that were in STEM. And so identity is a really powerful predictor for what career you choose. So there's a lot of communities who just don't have a lot of role models where they're looking at people who are in STEM. So the thought was, hey, if we get kids role playing STEM, maybe they're more likely to actually go into STEM. We could widen participation in STEM. So we'll see with more research. And so but that was a very fun game. What the surveys were clear was they loved it. They loved playing it. They're really interested in it. They love being able to put a lot of their learning and ideas to work. So I think the kids who played the STEM actually enjoyed it more than the D and the other one. I'm not sure why that is, but that was an interesting thing from the data. But yeah, here's some photos from the kid from when we were playing with the kids. Um, yeah, so that's transformational play, in a nutshell. This is me trying to apply it in the real world. It's not something you can drag and drop into your classroom, but it's a framework for thinking about how do we maybe alter and apply tabletop RPGs in a given context. What might be, something of a lighthouse to guide our thinking as we do some design. Um, yeah, follow us on Kickstarter. Questions or thoughts?
That's the trying to kind of meeting.
No, no.
But one of the things I was really excited about, and I read this in like the little piece the Google Doc you shared with me once, is the idea of getting kids to role play something like a natural disaster, because my kids have here in California we've got floods and we have all kinds of things and earthquakes and stuff, but they don't have a real visceral memory of that, or they don't. They struggle with thinking through the implications of things like that happening.
Yeah.
So giving them saying, okay, we're going to read a piece about natural disaster or about animal rescue after an oil spill, and then just immerse them in the problem to think it through, even if they haven't done any research. Just the idea of like, you're going to solve this. What do you need to know? And then they have to start thinking about, what do I need to know? What are my next steps? Where can I find this out? And then we can extract ourselves from the game, go do that, and then they can come back into the game. I mean, that to me was, when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I got to do this. It was really fun.
No, it's a great idea. I mean, you could think of a number of scenarios, like what are the top emergencies or disasters where people are likely to encounter, and come up with a book of like role playing those scenarios as a way of rehearsing those, right? Like, the people do this at governments do this at the very high level. The war games, right? We do model UN, and they do what's called scenario planning. Hey, what happens if people start looking at the nuclear weapon, with Russia? Like, what does it look like if he does this? What do we do? What's scenario one? What's scenario two? What's our reaction? And then by role playing that, it gives us.
They actually role play zombies.
Yeah, right.
Zombie apocalypse plan, because it's such a great one to target all these problems that are impossible, but they force you to creatively think around it.
I actually used part of that because David Hunter many years ago put out something called zombie-based learning, which is project learning, all for geography and stuff like that. And they talked about this, the governments, how they did the zombie preparation and stuff like that. It was really kind of fascinating. But going on what Drew said earlier as well, like I said, I do special ed, so I do a lot of pull-out. And so what I would do with the kids when they were doing natural disasters is I ran a kids on bikes scenario with them. So where they had to solve, they got the resources and stuff like that, help the community rebuild afterwards. But of course, to keep them interested, it turned out there's aliens behind everything. But no, it's still, they took you all the character.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that fits into the framework for content with legitimacy, right? You want to talk about something that is going to feel real, is talk about disasters that are happening else, around the country or around the world. Like, what happens with a flood? There's a fire. What is it you're going to do? And it's interesting to hear, hey, we haven't studied the right thing to do yet. what are the kids actually going to, are they hitting the floor and crawling to avoid the smoke? Or are they running to go save their precious things, which is the wrong thing to do, and so, yeah, it sets up that schema for a later lesson to help better retain the content and, let's run it again kind of thing. Um, yeah, no, there, there's a topic that I think would resonate with administrators as you talk about, doing this stuff in that context. Maybe, yeah. Certainly an interesting idea for a product is to run this like that. Yeah.
It might make every year we do the school shooter training course, which is like, I mean, it's right up there with my enthusiasm for suicide. Those two are my favorite trainings every year, right? It might actually make a more productive scenario. Like, okay, maybe you don't actually role play a shooting, but you role play a situation that's similar.
Right.
And because like reading it puts you in the experience. You have to visualize it, imagine it, work your way through it, and it becomes that's why role playing.
100%. Well, and 100%. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
Oh, what I was going to say was I think, and that occurred to me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring it up or not, but I think no, it's the right thing to bring up because when I think about schools in the U.S., that's according to the news, like, my sense is that's the thing that's on everybody's mind. So,
Well, if I may, just on the topic, and sorry, my service is spotty, so I can't be on camera right now due to the inclement weather and storm, thanks to still being in state. I come from a police background first, too. I've pondered the same question, but I've also wondered, like, what you have more of, like, a fantasy lighter setting than, say, an actual school shooter, but a threat that you have to, do the steps for.
Right.
Thing that, and I mean, not to make it too lighthearted, obviously, but something that would actively encourage them. There's a threat of something that they would need to respond appropriately to, something they shouldn't take on, like a dragon in D&D with like a level 1 party or something like that. In this scale.
Yeah. Well, and that's that gets at and welcome, by the way, Harmon. Good to have you here.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I drop.
Well, it reminds me of some of the theory that goes into like counseling or psychiatry for folks with like when they're looking at behavior stuff. One of our contributors to the book, Dr. Anna Feliciano, works with neurodivergent students, and they they kind of role play social scenarios to help kids rehearse those skills, but in a safe space, right? So. And they do it not in, the real world. It's in a magical, it's like a Hogwarts style, like Strixhaven. I think one of the games she ran was, if you're familiar with Strixhaven, which is like a kind of a Hogwarts style module or setting. So it's slightly removed because that gives us, there's a technical term here from the research and I'm grasping at it now, but it gives us that buffer from the real world that makes it easier to deal with that scenario cognitively. And so, yeah, I think that suggestion holds up. It reminds me, what I was going to say was about the shooter thing was there's other scenarios than the actual, hey, there's somebody in the building. There's scenarios like, hey, your friend is saying XYZ to you in the chat, or they're talking about harming themselves. What do like these sorts of role plays of self-harm or other harm, like what do you do? Because a lot of kids, I know they're doing more of that training now in school, but having things where it's more of a role play scenario, a tabletop role play scenario could be maybe more impactful. I'm not sure. But yeah, it was another thought about, you could have a whole sequence of scenarios that could help with prevention. And let me also say, and you guys want to jump in here too, but I do think if we just had a lot more D&D clubs and a lot more kids involved, there would be a lot less school shootings, right? Of course, that's what I think. But if we, like I do think, not to advance the agenda, but yeah, sorry, I relinquish the mic.
Agenda. There's no agenda.
So I'm thinking along those lines of what do you do like when your friend says XYZ. I have students that have severe anxiety the minute they're told there's a deadline on an assignment.
Ooh.
You know, just to basic, you know, I have one young lady in 8th grade who literally the anxiety causes her to shut down if she's told there's a deadline on any assignment she's given. Now, partially, I blame that on the 6th grade teachers because the 6th grade teachers never deadlined anything for them. And we know this for fact. But I'm thinking this would be a way, you know, I've been trying to get her into D&D just so that she starts getting, you know, the social skills to handle, because we're noticing that her social development is not progressing at the rate of her peers, one of whom is a twin sister. So it's really
Wow.
interesting to watch the differences in development there. But I just run a D&D club after school, but I'm kind of, you know, but I work with the history department. I work with 7th through 10th history.
Wow.
So I'm really fascinated into how we can make this. Well, I co-teach 7th through 10th history. I do a self-contained U.S. history for 11th graders in New York State. So we're also dealing with all of the strictures around the Regents exams. So we can easily incorporate this into 7th, 8th, and 9th grade history. And in fact, the 7th and 8th grade teacher already teaches a class called History on the Table,
Yeah.
where he brings in board games. He does board games and does U.S. history through board games. So getting him on board, if I was able to develop something for, like, let's say, the Oregon Trail or the Great Depression or something else I can't think of at this moment. I know he would probably be on board, and administration wouldn't fight it on like a unit at some point in time. But I'm looking at this from the concept of how could you possibly incorporate this into coursework where the end result is a U.S. or global history Regents, where I'm not joking. I have 5 days to teach the United States Constitution.
Yeah, right, go. Yeah.
I want to jump off on your point about the young girl that you work with that gets anxiety with deadlines. I have a student who cannot imagine getting a question wrong. Just cannot imagine it. And as soon as she gets a question wrong, she just gets up and she's just bawling, throwing a full-on temper tantrum. She's never that version.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things going on in there. And one of the things that I started doing early on with her was in the role-playing games, I created situations for her to be disappointed.
Yeah. Practice
Because
that.
her
Yeah.
character was a healer. And so I
Right.
taught her that her healer could heal herself.
Mm.
Healer could heal
Right.
people. And together with that, I was also teaching her reading strategies. And so we would pull out her character and say, look, what's her character's name? I can't remember. Oh, Kayla. I say, look, Kayla here is using her spell to help you breathe. And so she would start breathing, and it's almost a panic attack.
Yeah.
The anxiety she has. She is able to breathe and reflect on it. And so this superhero character is, I think the word you're looking for is transitive persona.
Right.
It allows her to experience something that's not her, but now she's bringing that experience back to her own experience. And it's been so cool to watch.
Yeah, that is the phenomenon, and I was going to bring that up again. Like, what's so powerful about role playing a different identity, a different character, is it makes it easier when it's not so close to the bone to deal with those. And I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychiatrist, that's not my area of expertise, but that's how I understand how they talk about that. I did go through that course, How to Be a Therapeutic Game Master, through Geek Therapeutics, if you guys heard of this, and that was some of the inspiration I had for creating this group. I went through that about 2 years ago, and I thought we need to create that group, but for educators. And I want to be able to create courses and continuing education credits for educators who want to apply tabletop RPGs in spaces. So I want to work up to that, where we can go and get, because educators also need to get continuing education credits, and so we want to become accredited or work with a university or a college that can assign credits to some courses we're developing. So that's the hope. But through that course, I developed a character that was a kind of facsimile of my dad, who passed away a couple years ago, and it really helped me deal with some grief. And so that was really powerful for me. And so others have talked about that in other games and other ways of doing that. But yeah, just to put another log on that fire. Um, it's powerful stuff. Your project, and forgive me, I haven't gotten your name yet, but with the history cooking is really exciting. I have a couple resources I can ship you. Some websites and some other groups have developed a lot of role play games for history. I used to work with a classics professor who's done whole courses that are role play scenarios. A lot of them like ancient Greece and Rome, so not U.S. history, but I believe there's a couple groups that also do U.S. stuff. So let me connect you with some of those, and I'd love to collaborate if you end up looking to do some curriculum development.
So we were already supposed to collaborate. I'm Rebecca Sprague.
Oh, hey.
Yesterday.
Oh, hey. And I do apologize. Yeah, Susan, it turns out it turns out she was running a fever. My wife's 7 months pregnant and she was running a fever. And we were like, do we go in? Do we not go in? And we ended up getting a COVID. So she has COVID. And so we're, yeah, it's we haven't had to go in yet. So, it's helpful to know what it is. And so fevers come down a little. So, but anyway, I apologize. Yeah, I hope we can connect. I think next Tuesday we were talking about maybe getting together again. But yeah, we're looking for more folks to contribute. Anybody, we want to hear it. We want to share the XP with the world. So nice to meet you, Rebecca. We're approaching the end here. This was incredible. I have had just a ball connecting with everybody and hearing everybody talk about what they're working on and what they're excited about and what they're grappling with. And it's been really validating to share some of my experience and some of the theory we've been working with and preview some of the content from the book that's upcoming. So thank you guys. Let me know if there's any issues with recording this and sharing this with YouTube and with the group. Does anybody have any issues with that? No? All right. Wonderful. Thank you again. Let me know what you want next. Next week we have Steph from TTRPG Kids coming in to talk about, I'm going to be interviewing them. They're talking about a really cool format of RPGs called journaling RPGs. And one version of that is called solo journaling RPGs. They released a very successful backer kit project. They're going to talk about a little bit, but we're working with some ideas with products with journaling RPGs, particularly because they're so good at teaching reading and writing. So they strip out some of those mechanics that that some of us know and love about combat. But anyway, to be continued.
You're gonna record that one because unfortunately I'm teaching at the time that it's like 2:30 in the afternoon. But Steph's book is great. I would highly recommend that.
How to make a tabletop RPG for your particular kid. Yeah, another great book.
Thank you. I was trying to blank on the title. I have it on my bookshelf right over there. You can grab it, but yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, what was the name of that book again?
How to create
I'll get them out there after.
how to create a tabletop RPG for your particular kid. And I'll drop that in the resource thread there too. And check out, if you don't know TTRPG Kids. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it there or not. Yeah.
I can see the cover. So yeah, hopefully I can find it through my library or something.
I think it's on Drive Through RPG. I think that's where you can get it. I think that one came out about a year ago. Yeah, Steph has done just amazing work. Their website has so many resources. They're the OG. So check them out. And we're lucky to have them joining us next week. All right, guys, we're switching to Candlekeep. You're welcome to hang out and listen if you'd like. Thank you. Welcome. Candlekeep crew is here. Tim's here. Hello. Jennifer's here. How are you? My other you guys have been here all along, so that's great.
Hello, friendos.
Hello. Let's see. I might need to take 10 to gather some notes and to take a bio break. And let's see if we're gonna get who else is joining? I think Marianne can't make it. And we also have Garrett, right? The other Garrett, who maybe or may not make it. Let me also stop recording.